Okay, so I was going to open the show and talk to you about the most annoying day I had on Friday. Pretty much everything went wrong. I was going to take you from A to Z of how crappy my day was and then relate it to the fact that our clients have these days a lot more than we do because they're going through a divorce and how crappy that is. And then we turned on our recording today to start recording, and literally everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. I have no microphone. I am recording on a phone because we have this lovely guest that we cannot not have on our show. And we're just rolling with it. So the moral of the story is get moving, get over it, and just let's move on. That's my moral today. Because if I let myself go down the like bad rabbit hole, I would just probably be throwing things at this point.
I like it. You're bringing it back to what we talk about all the time. And I mean, you know what? We had the same thing happen yesterday. Yesterday was on me. I was texting you yesterday morning. I'm like, man, I thought for the first time in weeks I was going to have like a full day off, like a Sunday where I'm not working at all. I was so excited. And then first thing in the morning, I'm getting texts from you saying, aren't we recording like right now? Because the guest is messaging us and I think we're supposed to be recording. I'm like, fuck. I didn't have a day off. And it was so hard for me to bounce back from that and to actually have a good rest of the day because of this like flub that happens. And I think that divorce is a series of flubs. It is a series of things that happen that you weren't planning for, and now you've got to roll with it. And the biggest thing that you don't plan for in your life is you have children. And when you're lying there in a hospital bed and the nurse puts your baby on your chest for the first time, the last thing that comes through your mind is, well, one day I'm going to be signing a legal document that says when I'm going to have this baby and when I'm not. You don't think about that shit. It is the most unnatural thing to talk about what we're going to talk about today, which is custody schedules. And I don't know why we are always talking about custody on this goddamn show, Morgan, because I hate nothing more than talking about custody.
I could not agree more, but have you read the title of our show?
We're going to change it. We're going to change it. We're going to start talking about, I don't know, I don't know, something easier because this is just wearing on me. But I get it. I understand why we're talking about it. And I understand that there are so many parts of this that are so hard and so icky. And that's why we have to talk about it because this is the most important stuff. These are the areas where you stand to make the biggest mistakes. So here goes. Let's get into my least favorite topic. Today, guys, we're going to get really specific with you on what you can actually do to help yourself figure out how do you make this custody schedule. So, today we are hanging out with Rebecca Para. She's a family law attorney as well as a family law and dependency mediator down in Florida. And she also serves as the judicial education coordinator for our family wizard. Rebecca, hi. How are
Hi,
you?
everyone.
How's it going over there?
It's going good. I think that's been like the theme. So being in Florida where I am, expect the unexpected and a hurricane a month has been the norm. So I'm ready.
You are the captain of rolling with it.
I am the, yes, chief rolling with it officer. I'm ready to go. Let's talk divorces. Better than hurricanes.
That is true. Hi, Rebecca. So I love that you have you're wearing so many hats, the captain's hat, the divorce hat, the lawyer hat, the mediator hat. You've got all these things. But the one thing that I love that we're talking about, parenting plans or parenting schedules, or some people call it custody agreements. You're a mediator and you see everything from such a unique angle. And so I really
Mhm.
want to start there today. And I want to ask you, what are some of the biggest issues you're seeing when divorcing couples are trying to figure out their custody or parenting plans?
I think the biggest challenge they face is just right off the bat, it's overwhelming. Cause I mean, it's like you're going from what was normal for however long to contemplating just dividing time and doing all these different things that's not really natural. As you were saying, Andrea, it's like you're not born given the baby, and then it's like, oh wait, let's think about how to do a 2 2 3 3. Like it's not natural. And I think it's overwhelming and it's hard. And so I think, before as a mediator, sometimes when they get to me, sometimes they're prepared and sometimes they're not. And you can see the ones that aren't and they just look overwhelmed, kind of deer in headlights kind of thing. And that's where I just think it just can be so overwhelming. So the more preparation they can do, the more planning, the more long-term thought process, kind of the better in those circumstances.
You are you're depicting like perfect, scenario here, right? Where somebody's able to think long
Mm,
term and have the big picture. But I got to tell you, ain't nobody I know able to do that because you're all right. Let's make this the hurricane reference. Like you're in the eye of the storm.
yes.
Your world is crumbling. You've got emotional sandbags all over you trying to keep this together. And and I get it that there's no other way to do this. But it's the combination. I think the reason why I hate talking about this topic is because there's no win. There's
Mm-mm.
no way to do this where it's like, "Oh, damn. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Morgan. You made this so much easier. My God. Who knew? What a great arrangement you guys made up for me." It doesn't exist because it is going to be hard and it is really hard to have the big picture
Mhm.
when it when you're sad and you're hurting because you don't want to do this. And I don't want to talk about
Mhm.
this right now because I hate the idea that we have to do this. I hate the idea that I'm coming off it wasn't my parenting weekend this weekend. I haven't seen my kids in a few days. I don't like that. I don't like the fact that I'm about to pick up my kids from school in an hour and I don't know what their lives were like for, the past few days and you don't know what you're coming into, where they're at and how to parent them. So, I think that all of that together is what makes this really icky and tough.
And I want
Yeah,
to
there's
take
no good part of this. Like, there's no happy side of this for sure.
But I do want to take a step back because if you're our listener right now, you're probably, going between wanting to turn us off, wanting to throw up, and wanting just to, like never listen to this podcast again. And what I want to say a few things. Number one, Andrea, I've seen her go through this, process in the last few years. I mean, we always say it on this podcast. She couldn't even talk about this topic 2 years ago. Now she's in a better place. Does she like it? No, but you know what? She's figured it out and she
Mhm.
doesn't talk about it and start crying every time she talks about it like she did before. So there is this process that you will be okay. The other thing I want you to know is that it's not like you start the divorce process and the next day you're entering into a custody agreement or a parenting plan. That is like probably the worst thing you could do. You don't want to rush that. I
Mhm.
suggest for somebody who's coming into the process, or maybe it's the beginning of the process, take a deep breath. We're not making any rash decisions. Number one, I would say, and what I see most people are most calm around this when one, they've done their research, they understand the options, they understand the custody or creative options with regards to parenting plans. Your attorney knows you, they know your family, they know what matters to you. And then really research and time are the only two things that make this okay.
Mhm.
So if you're right now in this like heart palpitation kind of place, one, we understand. Andrea has been there, but we're here to tell you that you will be okay as long as you don't make major mistakes. And major mistakes come when you don't research or you rush into something. Rebecca, am I on point there?
No, I 100% agree with that because I think sometimes I even joke in mediation, like I call it a sweet spot. Because as the mediator, our goal is to get a settlement. I mean, truly. And if it's too early and if the emotions are too high, I mean, me personally, I'm like, well, most mediators, I think the success rate is kind of low. Whereas if they've had some time to process, think things through, plan, even talk to an attorney, kind of get everything in order. Because I think until you put some planning and thought, and it's not easy. None of this is easy. Like it's your family. There's nothing more sensitive and powerful and meaningful than your family. So that's where I fully agree with everything you said. And just how people do it is so personal to everyone.
So, okay, so here's the deal. We've established that it's hard. We've established that it's unnatural. And you already know that. You don't need the three of us to tell you that. You're feeling it. We promised you at the very beginning of this episode that we're going to give you some specifics on what you can do. So, one of the biggest things that I think I really struggled with was not being able to conceptualize what the hell we were talking about when like I said, you're already in like the eye of the storm. Emotions are running everywhere. And then someone says, okay, now we need to decide what parenting schedule you want. And you're like, I don't fucking want any of these schedules. So, what we want to talk about today are some tools and some things that you can do so that you're able to see what the hell your attorneys are talking about. And hopefully, by being able to visualize something, it helps your brain come to the most intellectual decision rather than just feeling everything. So, one of these tools is a new software that's available that's called Custody Navigator. So, Rebecca,
Hmm.
explain, and I know this is something that you are using. So,
Oh, yeah.
explain to us what the hell is Custody Navigator and what's it doing for people?
Well, I think you touched on something really important is one visualization. I think that's so powerful because sometimes I think like whether somebody talks to a friend or a relative and they're like, you've got to do a 2233. Your life depends on it. Okay, great. Like, and then they run it. Custody Navigator, long and short, is a free tool. It's a place where you can kind of play around with parenting schedules. It will show you what it looks like. It can do breakdowns of overnight percentages for child support purposes, which is a whole different discussion. We'll stay on track with parenting plans for today. But it really can help conceptualize and visualize different plans. So those people saying 2233, only way to go. You look at it and you're like, well, this doesn't work for me. I work these nights. Like, I don't want to see my ex every other day. Like, it's
So
a
wait,
great
so
tool
back
to
up.
help
Is it a
visualize.
calendar? Are we talking about like a virtual calendar? Like how are you how are you seeing it?
So if they go to custodynavigator.com, I mean, me, I am personally a very visual person to a fault. And I do it in my mediations. I did it when I practiced. It is, yes, it is a tool. It is a calendaring tool. And they can put in like different examples of schedules. They can try the more traditionals. They can put in like a customized. And then once they put it in, they can add holidays. And then they can also press a summary button that'll give them the percentage of overnights. It's a really, really good tool. And the nice thing is, you're not held to it. You can try different plans, different schedules, and see what actually works with your work schedule, with how many times you really want to exchange with your ex, which might be none, but you know.
I mean, look, that's a part Morgan and I talk about this. We just talked about it on a recent episode. We don't think, we meaning the person who's going through the divorce, you don't think about exchanging with your ex and what that does to the kids. When
Mhm.
you're doing this, all that goes through our mind, and I almost want to say selfishly, but don't get upset with me for saying that, guys, is you think about you're thinking about me. You're thinking about me as the mommy. Well, geez, I don't want to go that long without seeing my kids. Or maybe you're thinking, geez, my kids shouldn't go that long without doing this or this. But in something that is so hard to keep at the forefront of our minds is that back and forth shifting between mom and dad, or mom and mom, dad and dad, however, whatever the breakdown is, that shift is tough on the kids. And it's not just
Mhm.
if there's a high conflict exchange, it's the shifting back and forth too that can present a challenge for some. It's really important how you do it. I know a lot of times people talk about shift at school if you can and things like that. But what I don't even know how to ask this. You and Morgan, Rebecca, you guys see so many different cases. And I know that Morgan, you are really an expert on getting creative with helping people come to a conclusion that maybe they wouldn't have thought of themselves. But how do you help people even get over that hurdle of, look, Andrea, this is something you're going to have to do. I know you don't want to do this, but you got it. You have to do this. Like, Morgan, what do you say to people?
I s- First of all, I don't throw it all at them at once.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? That is so overwhelming, and there's going to be a lot of people listening to this that are like, yeah, that's what my lawyer did to me.
Yeah.
Don't feel like bad about feeling overwhelmed if that's what happened to you. It is so overwhelming. So I try to baby step it. I say like, look, this is big picture what you're going to have to tackle next. When you're ready to talk about it, let's talk about options. And then, kind of talking about what Rebecca is talking about, the custody navigator, you could either speak with your lawyer about what different options look like, or you can play around on custody navigator and say, what schedule might work for me? A lot of time, the clients are looking to the lawyers to give them options and
Hmm.
ideas. And it might make sense to go on Custody Navigator before you even talk to your lawyer so that you're seeing options so that you can kind of identify what's feeling more natural and what isn't. So that when your lawyer's like, well, this is one idea, you're like, well, I've already thought about that. Or you could do it vice versa. You could talk to your lawyer, say, I don't like this, I don't like that, go on Custody Navigator. So it's baby stepping, really. It's baby stepping and figuring out what works best for your family. Rebecca, what do you think about that?
I fully agree with you, Morgan. And honestly, I think we must have very similar styles because even when I practice, I don't believe in because they're going through a trauma. That's it. And if you try to force something, even though you, as the legal professional, think it's best, like baby steps. And like even as the mediator, if I can sense that they're overwhelmed, I'll say, look, we can pause this. We can come back. We can reconvene another date, do some research, like look on Custody Navigator, play around with the schedules, do what you need to do, and then we can reconvene back in mediation. Like and you never want a parent to feel overwhelmed or just like, and I know some attorneys, there's probably many attorneys that do this. Like, we need to decide now, now, now. But in reality, I like your approach best. And I do similar, just let's take it easy. Let's do this one step at a time.
I love the fact that I asked you guys, what do you do to tell a client to get it through a client's head they have to do this? And both of you basically said you don't. Like, you don't, like, you can't tell someone how to feel, and you can't tell someone when to do something if they're not ready. And I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting you guys to say that. And that was like really cool to hear because that felt right. It felt like, yeah. And I'm thinking now, this this tool, this custody navigator, seems like it's almost a more passive way of helping somebody if they're not ready to be right in front of their attorney. And I think, I imagine that if you're already really emotional and then you have this person whom you have a professional relationship with, you're paying them a lot of money an hour, and they're writing these different things down and they're saying, well, you could do this, you could do every other weekend, you do this, you do that. You're probably overwhelmed. You're not able to absorb what they're saying, and you're starting to get emotional. So you're going to shut down. So looking at this software where you've got a calendar that you kind of play around with, it gives you that time to feel through it so that you're able to eventually think. What I'm wondering though is, how would a user use this? Is it something that's actually used during a mediation as well as somebody saying, "Hey, attorney, I went and looked on Custody Navigator and here's what I saw?" Or how are we doing it?
I can answer. I use them in mediations, especially if I have two pro se parent or self-represented parents. Like, I
Mhm.
will use it because I think sometimes, again, their best friend has a 2233. So they come in and they say, I want this. And I'm like, well, you're a firefighter. Like, that won't work. Like, so I think showing them. So I do actually use it in mediation. And then they look at it and they're like, oh, wow. Yeah, that doesn't work at all. So I think it could be both. They can play around with it on their own. But I use it as a visual tool to help in the mediation process, especially if they're just coming in fresh without even having met with an attorney yet.
All right, so let's swap some stories because we love stories. Our listeners can wrap their arms around what we're actually talking about here. So I'll start. I had, this is kind of one end of the spectrum. I had a very intelligent, high end male client, very analytical. He had this brain that was very mathematical. And this was not the actual norm. But when we talked about options for parenting plans, he kind of zoned in on one option that might work for him. And a lot of people look at it month to month. So they look at it as like a whole month. What does my month look like if I agree to this plan? This guy actually went and planned it out for the next 4 years. Not
The-
only did he do the schedule, but he put in the holidays and what he thought would happen. He actually pulled the children's schedule offline from the children's school. The children's school actually had the next 4 years online. And he literally mapped out 4 years of his life under this schedule because he didn't want to miss something. He didn't want to feel like, oh man, I got duped because she got an extra day or something like that. And honestly, that was one for the books. I'd never had someone do that, but I also understood why he did it and I wasn't upset by it. And I said, fantastic. I've never seen this done for 4 years, but hey, we're not going to miss a thing here. So it was really impressive. Rebecca, what have you seen?
Well, I think I had like your polar opposite person. I was pulling up a calendar and I was showing a couple, and it turned, in this case, the mom was self represented. The father had an attorney, and we happened to be in one room. We weren't separate, and we were trying, the father wanted so bad to be at 50-50. And so I showed them a schedule, and the dad, and I saw his attorney just look like he was about to cry. The dad said, "But then I lose Friday nights. I want to go out Friday nights." And the attorney, you could tell he wanted to strangle this man. He was like, "No." So basically, you took your desire, so desired that 50-50 to, oops, well, I lose my Friday night out now. So it's amazing. I don't know. You never know what people will find problem or issue with. But yeah, that
Okay, you're
attorney
bringing up a
not
point
happy.
that I want to talk about because the Friday night thing, right? Obviously, that's a guy who's saying like, "Well, this isn't working for me."
Mhm.
Okay? And but really quickly, Morgan, your guy, I know that you're saying that that's like amazing. That sounds like sociopathic behavior to me. I'll just say it. Anyone who can map out 4 years, like do 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 do, like I bet all of his shampoo bottles are like labeled and like with like yeah, that's just odd to me. So if you
I
guys
know
are
you would be
sitting here
shocked, but he was a titan of business and there's a reason for it, right? Because, who else could do something like that?
I mean, yeah, I mean, and I'm not one to judge. I couldn't I was just saying 2 episodes ago that we record an entire episode with my mic not on. So I'm not one to say like I ain't gonna be at the top of Forbes anytime soon. So I get it and creepy. But let's talk about the Friday night thing because it goes directly with this theme we hear a lot when we're talking about custody schedules where it's you got to put the kids first. It's got to be about the kids. This is for the kids. What the fuck does that mean? I'm not dumb. I know it's about the kids, but what does it mean to actually you put the kids first, right? Oh, what's going to be best for them? That is so hard to do. It really is. And I'm not saying that this guy, the man who wanted his Friday nights, okay, I get it's kind of like a weird dick thing to say because you're like, are you fucking kidding me, dude? But at the other hand of it, there are things that are important that we can do. Like you mentioned before, Rebecca, like if a guy is if she's a firefighter, right? And her schedule doesn't allow for that. It's like where do you draw the line and how do you actually put your kids first? That's my question.
Morgan, do you
Anyone,
want to go
anyone
first?
jump in here.
Look, I think you have to be realistic, and a good lawyer is going to say, listen, this doesn't work. Your schedule is what it is. We have to work around your schedule. Unless you're planning, lady, on getting off the fire department tomorrow, or this happens a lot with unique schedules. It could be a nurse or things where they have overnights. And then maybe sometimes like doctors, they have a lot of call schedules, those kind of things. Those schedules are, seasoned lawyers, we've seen those schedules a million times. We know that the traditional, 50-50 or 60-40 may not work with all of those schedules. And a good lawyer is going to say to you, one, your ideas of, this rigid schedule, one, is not going to work. And two, but here's what could work and here's what we can do for your schedule. So I think it's more about being realistic rather than, trying to say you're not putting your kids first. It's more like, what's reality here? What have you been doing? Because if you look back in the marriage, someone was with the kids when mom was on the fire department sleeping overnight there. It wasn't her. And so it probably can't be her on those nights going forward. And we just have to be realistic.
I totally agree. And I say that all the time. I'll say, look, what have you been doing? Like you've been married or at least, had a child together. It's been X amount of years. Okay, all of a sudden you don't want mother-in-law to pick up the children, but she always was. Like, what makes it different now? Or what has changed? Because it has been working. Now all of a sudden it no longer works. Like, tell me why. And as you said, setting client expectations. I mean, I don't wear the attorney hat, I wear the mediator hat these days. But even as the mediator posing to the attorneys, just saying, what do you think of that? Like, so they've done it this way. What do you think of doing a whole kind of putting it back on them to think, wait, maybe that won't work? Like, I think just posing the questions more so as a mediator, but on the attorney side, yeah, definitely setting those client expectations realistically.
How can using Custody Navigator help a client communicate with their attorney about what they want?
Well, I think it allows them the freedom to really look into plans. I mean, Custody Navigator, realistic is I also work for our family wizard. So if we're talking communication, that gets into a different realm. But talking Custody Navigator, it's just simply to build that schedule. It's going to be a free tool that they can use to build that schedule. And it can show their attorney, like, this is what I was envisioning, like, this is what has been working. This is what has worked for us. And just kind of put it on paper, put their thoughts on paper. Cause it just, again, going back to it can be so overwhelming
Mhm.
and it's just hard to think straight. I mean, so I think it can just help show the attorney what they're trying to get at.
So a part of Custody Navigator also includes how this particular schedule would impact child support, which I know
Mhm.
is can be a totally different topic in it of itself. But I think it's important to mention it right now as well, because we want people to be cognizant of what they're agreeing to and how that could affect like financial compensation. So how I mean, have you guys both, and this is like such a dumb question because of course you have, experienced divorcing couples where unfortunately the custody schedule is also being affected by what someone wants and or doesn't want in terms of child support? Eh,
So, yes, yes,
okay.
I'm going to go
Yeah.
first. It's one of my most hated things that the legislature in Illinois has done. And it seems to be some kind of a trend around the country, kind of taking off. And for those that are like, what the hell are you talking about, Morgan? What I'm saying is in Illinois, we have this law that basically counts overnights. It counts overnights with a parent, and then it determines the child support depending on what kind of income you're at based upon those overnights. So, what does that mean? Well, if somebody gets more overnights and you hit over this kind of imaginary line threshold, your child support may go down. And so, a lot of people, unfortunately, are smart enough to know that the ones that payors, the ones that are going to have to pay the support, and they're pushing for more time, not necessarily because they want it or need it. It's because they don't want to pay so much. And that's the dumb thing that the legislature did to us divorce lawyers. They put us in this bad position. What do? A lot of times, what I do in these types of cases is right off the bat, I try to come to an agreement if we're in a mediation process with the other side that says, listen, we are not tying child support to overnights. Can we agree upon that? Because then everyone feels more comfortable to make the deal that they really want to make so that they don't get railroaded into some ridiculously low child support amount just because the other side can do it by arguing, 50-50. So it's something to consider, but you have to have it in the back of your mind and you have to ask your lawyer where you are in the world, in the United States. How does this parenting plan potentially affect child support?
Morgan, I need attorneys like you in my life, in my mediation world, because I wish more attorneys would do that. Because honestly, in the example of the dad I provided, it was all about child support. I mean, we're not dummies. Like you see through it. It drives me nuts. And it's like that's where I talk about what they've been doing. Like, let's say, I think in this circumstance, mom had done everything in that relationship. Everything. And now all of a sudden he wants to, and maybe, yeah, maybe he's stepping up, but so often you can just sense it's about the child support. And getting to that 50% is just about getting, that's why having attorneys like Morgan are like a unicorn, because you want somebody to be realistic and say, look, I get it, but let's do what's best for the kids and what's been working and what's this. Let's take that percentage of overnights out of it. But the realistic, it matters in Florida too. It's just part of it. Those darn overnights.
Well, something that Morgan said that is making me think about mediation in and of itself. Because Morgan, you just said, okay, I will say, let's agree to take child support out of the equation right now. And that works. That's great when when you're speaking between attorneys and mediating. Obviously, if a matter goes before the judge, then that kind of goes out the window, right? Because a judge is going to do like based on like the law, which is why I know we always want to be able to settle things and without going to that step, right?
Yes. Yes, you were taking a breath, so I didn't know if you're still
But
going to keep going
I
with
don't really know what
with
I
your
was doing.
discussion. So, yes, so in mediation, I don't get a deal done if I know that this child support issue is going to be a thing unless I have an agreement that goes into court order, something like that. Because we all know that if we go to court, the judges, at least where I practice, are only given the certain amount of tools to get it
Right.
done. And the tools say, hey, look at the overnights and then make it proportionate to the child support. And so I would never get a full deal done in mediation if I thought it was going to affect child support without getting some kind of an agreement. Otherwise, we know what will happen in court. And then what will happen in court on the parenting side? They'll be fighting tooth and nail to say, no way am I giving you 50-50. Now, I know in Florida, Rebecca, we just had a guest on and they were talking about how your law kind of starts at a 50-50 and then
Mhm.
kind of works backwards. We don't in Illinois start at a 50-50. We're a best interest standard. So there's a lot of argument there and a lot of pros and cons where I am about that. So Andrea, if someone did that, that's where there'd be a huge fight. It'd be on the parenting time. So if you,
Right.
if you want to try to be a little scummy on child support, then you're buying yourself a fight on the parenting time. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about mediation then, because we know, and in this, I mean, I can't speak for every, 50 nifty United States here, but like we know that probably in most states, you're going to mediate before you go before a judge, right? Like that tends to be the standard. We know of a state where that's not the standard, shout it. But okay. Custody Navigator is a tool that helps you see the schedule so you can visualize it. How can we utilize that as a benefit for this couple as they're mediating, Rebecca?
Mhm.
Because you do this all the time. So, what are things that somebody can do in mediation to help you help them come to the smartest conclusion for their family, and how does Custody Navigator play a role in that?
Well, I think just going, I love mediation because in mediation and as a mediator, you can be creative. As a practicing attorney, I couldn't really, I mean, you can I mean, you can definitely, but as a mediator, I feel like you're limitless because whatever they come to, you can do. And I always say that as a mediator, if you're going to court, a judge is going to look at it and say, well, this is what we're doing. There's no
Mhm.
creativity. It's following the law and that's it. So if you want, sky's the limit of what we can do in mediation. Come to me with your schedules, work them out on Custody Navigator, play around with it, come to mediation. Like, and that's where I feel like sometimes when I was talking about the sweet spot of mediation, it can be too early. So like if they're just like a couple weeks out from filing, they might need a breath. They might need a minute. Like work on some stuff, get some stuff together, go to Custody Navigator, come up with a plan. And it's not all about child support, but it's helpful to know. I mean, money is money and people need money. And if they want to at least get a sense of where they're going to be, like you could at least have that percentage of some kind of, and I think there's a lot of free child support guidelines throughout the country that they could at least have an idea. So when you go into mediation, you're best prepared as you're going to be, or by the time you even get to your attorney. So, whether it's mediation or going straight to the attorney.
Are there creative solutions that haven't been broadcasted yet of things that make this a little bit easier? Like, I know in my own custody agreement, I do something that works for my family. It probably doesn't work for a lot of families, but we found a little, not like, we found a variation of a schedule that works really well for me. Are there other little tools like that that you suggest to people, Rebecca, who are having a really hard time digesting a
Well, I know
schedule?
locally, we even, and again, not to go into the 50 nifty and what happens everywhere, but there's tools people can find, and there can be free tools out there. I mean, as I
Mhm,
mentioned, Custody Navigator, great tool.
mhm.
Around where I live, there's pre filing mediation. So they can do a mediation before even filing to kind of start a discussion, even. You know, I think people are only limited by their imagination, really. And as you were saying, why not get creative? What works for you, Andrea? Why can't people? Of course, you do what's best for your
Right.
family, your kids, and nobody else can speak better for your kids than you. Period.
I think that I'm glad we did this conversation because I think that giving people something tactical like Custody Navigator takes this abstract, kind of scary idea and makes it a little bit more approachable. And I'm very open with the fact that I hate having to talk about custody, and I would never say, "Oh, I shouldn't have gotten divorced because my life is so rocked now that I don't have my kids every day." I made the absolute best choice for every single person in my family, including my ex-husband. I think everybody is has the ability to be in a much happier and healthier place now, and it was really yucky, and I didn't have all the tools when I went through it. I fell into that unfortunate category where we had to do a parenting agreement at right off the jump. And that's, like Morgan said, the worst of the worst of the worst, and it was. And I think that being able to utilize a tool that helps you see it is a very important first step.
Couldn't
So,
agree more. I could not
yeah.
agree more. From a divorce lawyer to a mediator, and having this tool, just an extra helper. So it's a helper that you could use in mediation, you could use before mediation, you can use after mediation. Just know that it's there as an extra helper. And that's why we do this podcast, to give you these little tidbits of help so that you don't make the same mistakes that Andrea did in her divorce. We don't want that for you.
Are we gonna rename the show?
Andrea's
Oh,
divorce.
Framing
how not to be Andrea Rappaport. God, that would be a long show. Rebecca, thank you for having this conversation with us. If people listening to this episode are like, "Well, shit, I want Rebecca to be my mediator," or I want to learn more about what that magical unicorn has to say," how do they find you? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Of course, yeah. It's my email, just RPERRA at ourfamilywizard.com. I'm very accessible. And they can always go to the Custody Navigator website, kind of check it out on their own. But again, shoot me an email. I would love to connect with people. I'm super excited about this tool because I like any tools that help people. That's why I do what I do. Like, it makes my heart happy to talk about things like this. So thank you so much for having me.
Our heart is happier for having this conversation. I've never said something so wholesome on this show
Oh,
ever, and I never will again. But
okay.
thank you so much.
Back to hurricanes. Let's talk.